Hello everyone, this is Grace here. In this video, we will be discussing time of supply in case of change in rate of tax, section 14. So when there is a change in rate of tax in respect of supply of goods and or services, if two events out of the three events happen before the change in rate of tax, then old rate will be applicable. And if two events out of three events happens after change in rate of tax, then new rate will be applicable. So the three events which determine time of supply are supply of goods or services, date of invoice, date of payment. So these are the three events which you need to look into to decide the time of supply. So when the among these three, any of the two, if it is incurred or if the date is before the change in the rate of tax, then that rate will be applicable. So the old rate will be applicable. Suppose among these three events, any two which happens or any two events occurs on the date after the change in the rate of tax, the new rate will be applicable. So how is it going to work? Let us get into the explanation. Supply made before change in rate. So now among these three events, we will take the supply of goods is made before the date is changed. So the date of invoice was after change and date of payment was after the change. Then time of supply. So what will be the time of supply, they have asked. So when was supply made? Supply was made before the date before the rate was changed, and you should look into the other two events. So the majority wins here. So among now one event is before. Now you should look here. Date of invoices after the change, date of payment is after the change. So these dates are after the change in the rate. So as we discussed, if two events out of three events happens after the change in the rate of tax, then the new rate will be applicable. So among these three, supply was made before the change in rate, but other two events were occurred after the change in the rate. So this time of supply will be date of issue or payment. Among these two date, whichever is early will be considered. Next, when the supply is made before the change in rate, date of invoice is before the change, date of payment is after change. So now supply was made before the rate was changed. Then what is the date of invoice? The date of invoice is before the rate was changed was that date. So now here two events are before the change. So as per the condition, if two events out of three, so what are the three events? Supply of goods, date of invoice. So these two events which are occurred before the change in rate, and this event is occurred after the change. So as the two events are satisfied before the change, then the old rate will be applicable. So the time of supply will be the date of invoice. So supply will not be considered to decide the date. You need to take the date of invoice or date of payment. So when it comes to date of invoice and date of payment, whichever is early. So if you have three events like supply of goods and date of invoice, you will consider the date of invoice. So next, supply was made before the change in rate, then date of invoice was after the change, and date of payment was before the change. Yes, so now two conditions are satisfied before the change. That is, supply was made before the change and date of payment was made before the change. So as two events are satisfied before the rate was changed, so we will take the time of supply as date of payment. So as I've already told, supply date will not be considered, either the date of invoice or date of payment. So in this two, supply and date of payment were done before. So as these two events are occurred, you will be taking the date of payment as the time of supply. Next is supply made after change in rate. So now the among these three events, supply was made after the change of the GST rate. So now we will look into the other two events. When was it? So date of invoice was made before the change. So then okay, one event is after the change. Then if you look into the next event, the date of invoice is before the change of the rate. Now the date of payment, if you look into it, is after the change. So if you look after the change of rate, there are two events which has occurred, that is supply made after change in rate and date of payment was made after change. So you will be taking the time of supply, that is date of payment. Next, date supply, as the supply was made after the change which is fixed here, change in rate, we will look into the other events. So which is after. Now date of invoice, if you look again, it is before the change, and date of payment is also before the change. So among these three events, that is supply, date of invoice and date of payment, date of in two events are before the change. So as it is the majority, before the change date will be considered. So if it is date of invoice and date of payment, whichever is early, that date will be considered as time of supply. Then the third situation, when the supply is made after the change in rate, then the date of invoice is also after the change and the date of payment is before change. So as the two conditions are satisfied, that is supply is made after the change in rate and date of invoice is after the change. So these two are after. So we will be taking among this, the date of invoice will be considered as the time of supply. So let us get into the problem to understand it more clearly. So this is the problem. So time of supply of goods or services in case of change of effective tax rate, section 14. So determine the time of supply and effective tax rate in the following situation. So they have given us 6 situations and they have given the service provided date, that is nothing but supply of goods or supply of service, that date is given. Then invoice date is given, then payment date is given, and they have given us assume service tax rate is rate up to 31st June 2017 was 15% and the GST rate from 1/7/2017 was 18%. So the GST rate is changed from 15%, the tax is changed to GST rate 18%. So the date is given from when it is changed, that is from 1st July 2017 the rate was applicable, that is 18% was applicable. Now we will understand what is the time of supply. So solution, situation 1. So among these three situations, any of the two should be before the change in rate or after the change in rate. Only then that date will be applicable. So now services provided and invoice date and payment received date we have taken. So now what will be the time of supply? We will decide first. So now this service provided is 28th June 2017, which is before the change in rate. So when was the change in rate occurred? From 1st July. So this is before the change in rate, and this is invoice raised is, so the invoice date is after the change, and the payment received is also after the change. So the two conditions are after the change. As the change was made on 1st July 2017, these two events, that is invoice date is after 1st July 2017 and payment is also after 1st July 2017. So these two conditions are satisfied. So among this, whichever is early we will be considered. So which is early among these two payments, that is 3rd July 2017 is the earliest. So that will be the time of supply or point of taxation. So which date will be applicable, as the condition is after the date of change in rate, as these two dates are after the change in the rate, we will be taking the rate which is done after the change, so that is 18%. So next situation is the service provided date is 28/6/2017, which is June, and invoice raised is June and payment is July. So in this both that is service provided and invoice date is before the change in date. When was the change made? 1st July. So these two events occurred in the month of June, that is before July, that is before change in rate. So as these two conditions are satisfied, we will be taking the invoice date as consideration. As I've already told, the date at which services provided or supply will be provided will not be considered. Instead of that, invoice raised or payment received date will be considered. In the first situation, we got invoice received and payment received. So among this, whichever is early will be considered. But when we get situation with the date of service provided or supply made, we will be considering the invoice raised or payment received, any of the date which is earlier. So now, and in this condition, we have two dates which is before the change in rate. So among this, we will not have whichever is earlier. We will among service provided and invoice raised, we will not pick the date which is earlier. We will directly take invoice raised date, that is 30th June 2017, and the date is 15%, as both the events occurred before the day before the rate was changed. Then in your third situation, the service provided was on June 28th, and invoice raised is July, and payment received was in the month of June. So two conditions are occurred before, that is service provided and payment received both are before. So we will be taking the payment received date, which is 30th June 2017, and the percentage as it is before, the two events are before, we will be taking 15%. So next, in the fourth situation, July was the service provided, that is after the change in GST rate, and invoice raised was on June and payment received was again in July. So now July and July, two events are in the month of July, which is after the change of rate. So as it is after the change of rate, we will be taking payment received, because the other date is service provided, we will not take that date, we will take payment received. So 5th June will be the time of supply, and the rate we will be taking after change in rate, that is 18%. Next, service provided, fifth situation was on July, and the invoice raised was in June, and the payment received was in the month of June. So now, if you look into this three event, two events were before change in rate, that was in the month of June. So among this, which are invoice raised and payment received, are the two events which was before the change in rate. So as two events are satisfied, among invoice raised and payment received, whichever early will be considered. So invoice raised is early, so we will be considering 28/6 to 2017. As it is before the change in rate, we will be taking 15%, which was the service tax rate. Next situation, among the three events, service provided was in the month of July, and invoice raised was in the month of July, 5th July, and payment received was in the month of June. So service provided and invoice raised, both the dates were in after the change in rate. So two conditions are after the change in rate, that is two events are after the change in rate. So among this, which date would be considered? Invoice raised date. Only when the comparison is between payment received and invoice raised, we will be taking whichever is early. But when the comparison is but the events, if it is between or comparison between service provided and invoice raised, or supply made or invoice raised, we will be taking invoice raised or payment received, any of that date. So now the two events which is before after the changes, service provided and invoice raised. Among this, whichever is early will not be considered. Invoice raised date will be directly taken, which is 5th July 2015. So what rate will be considered? As as these two events are occurred after the change, we will be taking 18%. So this is the problem to understand the time of supply of goods and services in case of change of effective tax rate, section 14. So now we will be discussing problems on ascertaining time of supply. Illustration Illustration 1, non-continuous supply and solution, date of receipt. So before solving this problem, we need to understand what is continuous supply and non-continuous supply. So for non-continuous supply, so where the supply is not enough frequently occurred or recurring. So among this, you need to consider the date of receipt of goods, the date of payment, the date of invoice issued by the supplier. If it is not possible to determine the time of supply, the time of supply shall be the date of entry in the books of accounts of the recipient. So among this, whichever is early, you will be considering. So for continuous supply is the supply which is made frequently. So in this, date of issue of statement of account or receipt of payment would be considered as time of supply. So as we have the problem here, which is non-continuous supply, Under this, we have date of receipt of goods, which is in 15 May 2020, and date of invoice on 1st June 2020. So date of entry in the books of the receiver is 18th May 2020. So among these three conditions, as I have told, for non-continuous supply, the date of receipt of goods, the date of invoice, the date of entry in the books of receiver, or of the receiver, whichever is early, will be considered. So in this three situation, which date is earlier will be considered as the time of supply. So in this situation, the time of supply of goods earlier date will be 15th May 2020. Yes, 15th May. May 15th is the earlier date will be considered. Hence, the time of supply date is 15th May 2020. Next, under illustration 2, ABC Limited sold goods to DEF Limited on 28th April 2020 for 50,000 plus GST and removed the goods from the warehouse for making supply to DEF Limited on the same date. Invoice was issued on 20th 4 2020, that is in the month of April. The payment was received in 18th April 2020. So, first we need to write the date of sold or removed from the warehouse. So ABC Limited sold the goods to DEF Limited on 20th 4. So the goods were removed from the warehouse on 20th April for 50,000 plus GST and removed from the goods from the warehouse for making supply. Then invoice date is the next item. So invoice date is on 20th April. So we will write the date. Next, the payment was received on 18th April. So when was the payment received? 18th April. So among these three situation, which is earlier, 18th April is earlier. So the time of supply is earlier of 18th April 2020. Hence the time of supply is 18th April 2020. So next illustration is illustration 3. Aishwarya Enterprise, a supplier of cement, has supplied 1,000 cement bags uh, of a value 3 each to 1 minute. Value of 300 each to Best Construction T Limited. The invoice for the same was issued on 5th February 2020 and payment was received on 18th February 2020. So find the time of supply. So the supplier of the cement supplied 1,000 cement bags. So bag value of 300 was moved to Best Construction Limited. The invoice for the same was issued on, so invoice date is on 5th February 2020 and the payment received date is 18th February 2020. So only two dates are given. So among these two dates we should find out whichever is early. So the date of invoice, the date of payment received, both is given. So among this, which is early is 5th February 2020. So the time of supply will be 5th February 2020. So the next problem is illustration 4. Mr. X is supplied goods to Mr. Y on 28 July 2020. The GST rate on goods is changed from 12% to 5%, whichever is 12% to 5%. 1st January. So it will be implemented from 1st January 2021. So Mr. X supplied goods to Mr. Y. So when was the goods supplied? On 20th July 2020. Then the GST rate on goods is changed from 12% to 5%, which was effect from on 1st January 2021. So the change in rate was on January 2021. So Mr. X issued invoice 28th August 2020. So it was issued in 28th August 2020 and payment is credited in his bank account on 30th December 2020. So now supplied goods was on 2020. Then invoice date is also in the year 2020 and the payment date is also in the year 2020. So if you look into it, any two conditions should be satisfied. But here all the three conditions are satisfied. That is before the date of change in the rate of GST. So we will be taking among these three, we will be taking as the three dates are also before the change, we will take whichever is early where between date of invoice issued and the date of payment. So invoice issued date is 28th August and payment made was on 30th December 2020. So which is early 28th August. So what is the time of supply in this case? 28th August would be the time of supply.
So which rate would be effective? So everything is before the rate before change in GST would be effective. So it is 12%. So the rate before change, what was the rate? 12%. So we will be taking 12%. So next, illustration 5. Reliable industries are ready-made garments manufacturer issued the voucher on 10th July 2020 to their prospective customer for enabling them to buy ready-made garments manufactured by them from their shop. Customer purchased ready-made garments on 20th August 2020. Find the time value of goods. So now, ready-made garments manufacturer, they issued a voucher. So when they issued a voucher, which was issued on July to their prospective customer for enabling them to buy ready-made garments. So ready-made to buy ready-made garments which was manufactured by them from their shop. So when was the voucher issued? 10th July 2020. And when the customer purchased the garment? 20th August 2020. So voucher is where it has been presented for the customer to use it or take benefit out of it. So as the voucher was issued on 10th July and you used it on 20th August, the time of supply will be whichever is earlier. So when was the voucher issued? 10th July. So 10th July is the earlier date compared to 20th August. So note, time of supply will be the issuance of the voucher since the voucher is identifiable with the goods. So as I have already explained, under the time of supply, the types, first was the forward charge, the second was reverse charge, then issue of voucher. So under issue of voucher, identifiable goods and non-identifiable goods. Identifiable goods are the goods which can be identified where GST can be imposed on it. So here they have clearly told ready-made garments. You will have the next problem where they will not mention you what kind of goods has been bought. So it is non-identifiable goods. So the time of supply for this problem is 10 July 2020. So the next problem is illustration 6. Shoppers stop store a large retailer who sells various types of products like ready-made garments, jewelry, cosmetics, fabric, shoes, etc. So there are different types of products. Issued the voucher. So shopper stops. They issued a voucher to the customer on 10th July 2020 to their prospective customer. So when was the voucher issued? On 10th July. Then for enabling them to buy any product from the shop. So the customer purchased ready-made garments on 20th August 2020. Find the time of supply of goods. So the time of supply of goods is whichever, if you look into this, the time of supply of goods, the voucher was issued on 10th July 2020 and the ready-made garments were purchased on 20th August 2020. So here they have taken the time of supply as 28th August 2020. So you can ask me a question, ma'am, if you want to take whichever is earlier, then we can take 10th July 2020. Why didn't we take 10th July 2020? So here in this condition, the date of supply or the goods bought by the customer will be considered because the goods are not identified. Because the voucher has different types of goods here, which is ready-made garments, jewelry, cosmetics, fabric, shoes, etc. But it's up to the customer's choice to select which product is going to buy using that voucher. So we still don't know which product, and the rate for each product and the HSN code for each product varies. So it cannot be decided based on the date of issue of voucher. When we look into the previous problem, previous question where what we solved, there clearly they mentioned it is only for ready-made garments. So it can the GST rate or the HSN code for it will be known earlier. So the date whichever is earlier can be applicable. But here it is unidentifiable goods. So we will not know what is the customer's preference in that date. So we will be taking the date at which the customer has purchased the goods. So the time of supply of goods is 20th August 2020. So the note is time of supply will be the date of encashment of the voucher, that is when the voucher is being actually used by the customer, since the voucher is not identifiable with any specific product. So the next question is illustration 7. So under illustration 7, value of services rendered is rupees 5 lakh. Date of issue of invoice is on 1st March 2021. Amount received on 13th March 2021. So ascertain the time of services. So in this, whichever is early will be considered. So obviously the date of invoice is earlier compared to the amount received date. So as the completion date is not given, it is assumed that the invoice issued within 30 days of the completion of service. Therefore, the time of supply is 1st 3 2021 or the 13th March 2021, whichever is earlier. So among this, whichever is earlier is 1st March 2021. So usually they give us three dates, that is time or the date at which the services was provided, and the date of invoice, and the date of amount received or paid. So in this, date of supply is not given. So among these two invoice in dates what we have, we will be considering whichever is earlier. So the next problem what we are going to discuss is illustration 8, calculation of time of supply. So value of services rendered is rupees 6 lakh. Date of issue of invoice is 3 March 2021. Advance received is 13th February 2021 is rupees 1,50,000. Balance amount is received on 15th March 2021. Then ascertain the time of supply. So for advance of rupees 1,50,000, time of supply is 3 March 2021 or 13th February 2021, whichever is earlier. So as the advance is received in the form of cash, in that terms we can use the dates, the date at which the invoice was received and the date of advance received, both is given. So among this, whichever is earlier can be considered. Therefore, the time of supply will be 13th February 2021, because the transaction is begun before the invoice was issued. So therefore, time of supply is 13th February 2021. For the balance amount, time of supply will be compared to the date of issue of invoice, that is 3rd March 2021, or the date at which the other payment has been done. So whichever is earlier. So the balance, as they have stated, which will be on 15th March 2021. So among these two, 3rd is the date of invoice and 15th March is the date of next installment which is received. So which is earlier among this, 3rd March 2021 is earlier. Assumed invoice is issued within 30 days of completion of services. So as we have already discussed, an invoice should be issued within 30 days of the completion of services. The next question is illustration 9. Srushti Private Limited imports services from UK. From the following details, ascertain time of supply, date of receipt of services, which is on 25th February 2021. Date of invoice issued by the service provider is 18th February 2021, and date of entry in the books of accounts is 28th April 2021. So here Srushti import services from UK. So they import services. So now under reverse charge mechanisms. So when import is made, the importer is supposed to pay the GST. So here it is a reverse charge mechanisms. So the time of supply among this will be whichever is early. So among these three dates, 25th April 2021 and 18th February 2021 and 20th April 2021, 18th April 2021 is earlier. So the time of supply will be 18th to 2021. Next is illustration 10, calculation of time of supply. From the following, ascertain time of supply of services. So now we have particulars. Services provided to a dealer in Dharwad. Value of completion is 2 lakh. Date of invoice is 15th January 2021. Date of payment is 18th February 2021. And date of service issued is 28th March 2021. So then service received from service which I'm sorry, the service which is being received from URT. So value of completion is 3 lakh. Date of invoice is 28th January 2021. Date of payment is 28th 1st 2021. Date of service is 5th December 2020. December 2020. So first we will take services provided to dealer in Dharwad. So the service which is provided to the dealer in Dharwad. So there are three dates, that is date of service, date of payment, date of invoice. So among this we will be considering the date which is early. So which date is early among this is date of invoice, which is before all the dates, that is date of payment and date of service. So it is on 15 January 2021 would be the time of supply. Then service received from URD is unregistered dealer. So the dealer who is not registered under GST. So it will be the persons so it will be a reverse charge mechanisms. So where the dealer, as he is an unregistered dealer, the service receiver will be paying the GST for it. So service from unregistered dealer, which is the date of issue of invoices on 28th January and 28th January and 5th December. So the date of service issued is earlier. So the date among these three dates is 5th December 2020 is earlier, so we will be considering the time of supply was 5th December 2020. So next, illustration 11. Value of services rendered is rupees 2,50,000. Date of issue of invoices on 9th September 2020. So the date of issue of invoices on 9th September 2020. Then advance received is 50,000 on 15th August 2020. So advance was received before the date of invoice. Balance amount was received on 11th September 2020. What is the time of supply? So from advance money received, which was received on 15th August 2020, before the date of issue of invoice, we will be taking 15th August 2020 as the time of supply. Then for balance amount, we will be comparing with the date of invoice and the balance amount when it was received. Whichever is early among that will be considered. So the date of issue of invoice is for the balance amount, date of issue of invoices on 9th September, and the balance amount was received on 11th September. So in this two, which is early, will be considered as the time of supply for the balance payment, which is to be balance amount which is to be received. So 9th September 2020 will be considered as time of supply. So please note, date of issue of invoice or date of receipt of amount, whichever is early, shall be considered as the time of supply under the second situation. So the next question is illustration 12. So Mr. Naveen supplies goods worth rupees 24,300 to Mr. Ganesh and issues invoices dated 25 so the invoice date is 25th July 2020 for 24,300, and Mr. Ganesh pays 25,000 on 30th 30th July 2020 against such supply of goods. So the excess of 700 is adjusted in the next invoice for supply of goods issued on 5th August 2020. So identify the time of supply and the value of supply. So if the excess amount is less than 1000, the time of supply shall be the date of issue of first invoice, that is 25th July 2020, and the value of supply shall be 25,000. So in this case, we need to understand that any excess which is received against the invoice, we need to consider the date whichever is earlier. So if the excess amount, if it is received is less than 1000, then the time of supply shall be the date of issue of first invoice. And if we compare the date of issue of invoice as 25th July 2020 and the payment which was received on 30th July 2020. So whichever is earlier among this is the date of invoice. So the time of supply shall be the date of invoice, first invoice 25th July 2020. And the value of supply will be 25,000. So suppose what if the amount is more than 1000? So the next problem deals with that. So Mr. Partho supplies goods worth rupees 24,300 to Mr. Vishwajit uh, and issues invoice dated 22nd July 2020 and for 24,300, and Mr. Vishwajit pays 26,000 on 27th July 2020. So here the invoice was issued on 22nd July and the payment was made 27th July, where excess of 26,000, where he is supposed to pay 24,300, he is paid 26,000. So where he is paid more than 1,000. So here against such supply of goods, the excess is 1,700. is adjusted in the next invoice for the supply of goods which is issued on 5th August 2020. So the next invoice which was issued on 5th August 2020. So date on which payment is entered in the books of accounts of a supplier is 30th August 2020, and the date on which the payment is credited to the bank account is 28th August 2020. Identify the time of supply. So in this case we have many dates, that is the date of invoice 22nd July 2020, and the date of first installment first payment which was received was 27th July 2020. Then we have the excess amount which was recorded or included in the second invoice on 5th August 2020, and the date which was shown in the books of accounts is uh, in the books of accounts entered by the supplier is on 30th August 2020. Then the date of payment which is actually shown in the bank or credited in the bank is on 28th August 2020. So if excess amount received is more than 1000, the time of supply shall be the date on which the payment is entered in the books of accounts of the supplier, or the date on which payment is credited to the bank, whichever is earlier. So we will be considering the date at which the supplier has recorded in the books. So when is the supplier recorded in his books? So he is recorded on 30th August 2020, and it is shown in the bank on in the bank statement on 28th August 2020. So 30th August 2020 and 20th August 2020, the earlier one is the bank account. So it is credited in the bank earlier before the supplier accounts in the books. So as 28th August 2020 will be considered as value time of supply or the date of supply. So the difference between the two examples or illustrations is, if the value is less than 1000, then clearly understand you need to take the date of issue of first invoice. If the value is more than 1000, that is the excess what is paid is more than 1000, then you would be taking the date at which the payment was credited in the account, or the date at which the supplier has recorded in in his books of accounts, whichever is earlier. Then under illustration 14, if the date of issue of invoice is 31st December 2020, due date of issue of invoice is 15th December 2020, date of advance payment received is on 10th December 2020, and date on which the amount credited to the bank account the supplier is 12th December 2020, what will be the time of supply? So here they have given us all the dates. So first is date of issue of invoice, which is on 31st December 2020. Then due date of issue of invoice is 15th December 2020. Then date of advance payment received is 10th December 2020. Then date on which the date on which the amount credited in the banks of accounts is 12 December 2020. So among this situation, a service is rendered or goods are supplied. So they have given us multiple dates. So there is no excess amount, or there is nothing related to change in rate, or nothing related to such adjustments. So among this, whichever early is early will be considered. So the time of supply will be 10th December 2020. So that is the date which is early among all the other dates. So illustration 15. If the date receipt of goods is 15 July 2020, date on which the payment is entered in the books of accounts is 20th July 2020, and the date on which the amount debited in the bank account is 22nd July 2020, what will be the time of supply? So the time of supply shall be the earliest of the following. So the receipt goods was on the date 15 July 2020. Then the date on which the payment was entered in the books is 28th July 2020, and the date on which the amount was debited in the bank account is 22nd July 2020. So among this, which is early, 15th July 2020. So we will be considering 15th July 15th July 2020 as the time of supply. So thank you everyone. The next problems will be looked into the other videos, the upcoming videos. So in this we will not have any calculation. We need to ascertain only the time of supply or the date of supply when the supply was made based on the conditions what we have already learned under section 12, section 13 and section 14. So we have learned some problems relating to section 12, section 13 and 14. We will also be learning the other problems where we will cover up all the problems or all the conditions under the time of supply sections.